Welcome back. In this video we're going to look at some more glossy materials. So once again we're in our coastmaterials.blend file. This is the file that you've either downloaded or that you've created yourself within your asset browser, where we're going to store all our materials. You can see that I have our metal folder with our brushed aluminum or chrome, our dark metal and our gold materials. You may have the same ones, you may have some other ones that you've created on your own. Now we're going to start creating some glossy materials. So we've concentrated on metals, now it's time for glossy materials. So I'm going to click new for a new material. And the main thing on a glossy material is a lack of roughness. So we're going to turn roughness all the way down. I'm just going to put it at 0. And straight away, let's just change the base color to something different. Let's just go with, see, something like this kind of light blue. And you can see straight away we have these really quite strong reflections. Now, unlike metallic reflections, what we're really seeing here is we're seeing the bright spots of our background, our lights and things like that. Whereas with metallic, if we have that all the way up, we can actually see a lot more detail in our reflections. It's a much more mirror finish. That's the main difference that we find between metallic materials and just plain glossy materials. We don't get the same colour onto our object as we do with metal materials. So roughness is the main thing that we're looking at here. So depending on how high we have that roughness, you can go from something that's a really highly polished glossy finish to something that's a little bit rougher, but not too rough. This could be something like plastic or porcelain, a bit more rough. Again, this could be something like the paint finish of a glossy paint or a semi-gloss paint. About halfway we start to get to more matte materials. So again, this could be another matte paint material. It could be plastic coating for any general device that you may find. As we get even further along, we start to get really rough materials with barely any real sign of reflections or specular highlights. Now at this stage, what we want to do is we want to create just a couple of variations of the same material. So at the moment, we're going to stick with this base colour, this blue base colour. The colour doesn't really matter. This is something that we can change. All we're really worried about at the moment is how rough our material is. So at the moment, we're going to go with 0 roughness. And up here, we're just going to go with glossy underscore rough O. We'll put an underscore before the O as well. So we're going to do the same thing we did before with our asset browser. We're going to create a new collection. We're going to rename that collection. And this one, I'm just going to go with glossy. I'm going to select our object. We're going to use Shift D to duplicate that. Right click so we don't accidentally move it. We're going to call this glossy. And I'm just going to call it glossy 0. Drag and drop this in our glossy folder. We'll open up the object, we'll open up the mesh to gain access to the material, right click and mark that as an asset. So now we have that material marked as an asset. Now what we want to do is we want to make a couple of variations on this. So the easiest way to do this would be just to go to the material tab at the top of our node editor and click on this new material, duplicate new material. So if we click on this, we copy all the details from this material, but we have a new name. I'm going to call this roughness. Well, actually, before I rename it, let's see what roughness value we want. Let's go with something like 0.1. Let's just type that in so we get it exact, 0.1. We can rename that. Now, because we have that roughness 0.1, we've actually taken it off of this object, but we can mark this as an asset. If we want, we can go back and we still have that roughness 0. And we can switch between those. They're still all marked as an asset. We won't lose them in this file. Again, we're going to duplicate this material. This time, let's take this roughness up to, say, 0.25. Actually, that's not much of a difference. Let's try something like 0.4. And let's just make sure we are changing that on this object. So we've created the new material, but we've not applied it to that object. So let's go over here again. So let's try 0.25 again. Okay, so that's a little bit better. We'll rename this 0.25. Again, we're going to mark this as an asset. We will duplicate this once more. We'll make sure we're on our object. We'll get our duplicate. We'll take this roughness and we'll make this roughness 0.5. So although I said we're going to mainly work on glossy materials, it makes sense for us to get a few different versions of our base roughness values here. So 0.5 again, and once again we're going to mark this as an asset. Now I'm just going to make sure this is all working okay. I'm going to save this file. I'm going to open a new file, and remember I changed my startup file so I have the same setup in here as we had in the last file. I'm going to right click on this top line and I'm going to do a horizontal split. Move that further down the bottom. We are going to open up an asset browser, and if we go into all, go to our materials, we should have a whole load of materials here, and you can see that we do have all those variations of roughness. So there's our 0 roughness. Here's our 0.1 roughness. Let's just make that a little bit bigger so it's a bit clearer that we're changing that material. So there's our 0 roughness, our 0.1 roughness, our 0.5 roughness, and which one was this? 0.25 roughness. So we have our 4 variations of roughness there. And I think that's plenty. That's going to get us most of the way there for a lot of these. You can even see that we have that other base material. We still have our metals, our dark metal, our gold. You may have a few others. At this point, you may have went ahead and done some more materials. So now we have our base glossy to matte type materials in our scene. So your challenge for this video is just to create a series of different materials with different levels of roughness. So you have a few different starting points for when you create any kind of glossy to matte type materials. Name your materials correctly so you know what level of roughness is actually on them and mark them as assets. And then just create a new file and make sure you can access your material library from the asset browser exactly the same way as I did. Now in the next video we're going to move on and we're going to look at another few settings in the principled BSDF node for creating glossy materials.